Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing Dan Simmons' sci-fi novel Hyperion. I'll talk real briefly about the author, go into a spoiler-free overview of the plot, talk about what I liked about the book, what I didn't like about the book, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off with what I'll be reading for next time. Dan Simmons is a science fiction and horror author, probably still best known for this book, Hyperion, and its sequels, as well as a book called The Terror, which I believe was made into an AMC show a few years ago, though I haven't seen any of his adaptations or read any of his other stuff besides this book. Hyperion, my understanding, has won a Hugo Award, and it's fairly well regarded in the sci-fi community. And what it's about, it's a little bit difficult to describe in brief, but it's essentially a series of a group of what we would call pilgrims are basically on this world Hyperion in order to ask a wish, a single wish for a deity. And in order to do that, they must all make a pilgrimage together. And the story is, there is a framing device for the story, but essentially what it is the backstory of all of these characters. I believe there's 6 characters who tell their stories and what kind of brought them to the world, and kind of explaining the reason for going on this pilgrimage. So that's a real quick description of the book. What I like about it is this book came out in 1989, and it is very, very, very dense. There's a lot of literary allusions to other things. And the book is almost in some ways an anthology of different standalone pieces. They do kind of have an overarching, there are parts of it that tie it to the overarching kind of framing story, but in essence, they're kind of, some of they work as kind of standalone stories. And the world that he paints and the picture he paints is very alien and feels very different and unique. There are several different kind of worlds in this universe, but the place where we spend the most time, Hyperion, is kind of gone into detail. And the world is a very unique place. There's every place that the characters go to feels different, and it just feels like there's a lot of imagination. And because they're kind of told in individual chapters, there's kind of a priest story, there's a soldier story, there's a detective story. Each one of them kind of deal with the different kind of science fiction conventions, I guess. And so, for instance, the priest story in some ways is a story about faith. The detective story is somewhat of a pastiche of noir and cyberpunk. So I thought that those were all really handled well. I think where the book shines is there's probably 2 or 3 of the stories that have more of a philosophical bent to them, and I thought those were kind of by far the strongest. A couple of them kind of deal with, I wouldn't say time travel necessarily, but dealing with aspects of time. Still trying to be vague, I don't want to spoil it, that I thought were really, really well done. And I'll get into who I'd recommend this book to in a little while, but there's kind of, to me, a clear line between this and the work of one other author. But I thought those were kind of the strongest. The priest story especially, I thought was really, really well done. There's some horror elements of that kind of tie that into faith in an interesting way, I thought. And so I'd say 2 or 3 of the stories are kind of some of maybe the best science fiction short stories I've ever read. They're really, really good. 1 or 2 of them are just kind of good, and there's 1 or 2 of them that I think kind of fall flat. So it's kind of a range of different quality, at least as far as the impact to me. So that was good. I think on the sides of the things that I didn't like as much, the book in a lot of ways feels to me like, even though it's the first book in a series, that it feels like it's the second or third book. And by that I mean that you're expected to kind of read the book, and there's going to be things that you don't understand, and you kind of have to just keep going. And it feels like a lot of ways that you just kind of drop down into the middle of it. So you'll have things like acronyms, and you'll have these different characters or these different descriptions of kind of alien flora and fauna on a world, and you just have to kind of keep pushing through with the hope that you kind of get an understanding of it later. And sometimes he does a good job of comparing things to things that would have happened on old Earth. The book is set into the far future, and so you have to, he does a good job of sometimes tying those back for the audience. Sometimes you get the references, and sometimes you don't. He also has some stylistic choices that I didn't quite understand. He'll refer to people as M. I guess that's a monsieur or madam, but that kind of stylistic thing is in the book a few times. I didn't quite understand that. And I think the biggest downside is, like, to me, the individual chapters are relatively strong, and the framing device is so overcomplicated and confusing that it did kind of at times take me out of the story. And I didn't really care about that stuff as much as I cared about kind of the individual characters and kind of their individual stories. And I wish there had been a way for him to maybe make them more, even a little bit more standalone. I thought that part of it was interesting. The kind of overarching framing narrative was just so complex with all of these different competing characters that I felt kind of drawn out of the book whenever those characters came into it. And it is, like I mentioned in kind of the intro, my understanding is it's the first book in a three or four book series, and there's a direct sequel to this, Fall of Hyperion. I haven't read it, so I can't really speak to the quality of it, but I'm hoping that it kind of finishes some of the things brought up in the book. The book does end on a cliffhanger, and so I just want to kind of put that out there. If that's something that bothers you, you may want to stay away from it. But like I said, it's fairly well regarded. I kind of understand why. The quality of the writing is really, really strong, and I think the philosophical ideas in it, to me, as far as who I'd recommend the book to, kind of clearly having read a couple of Ted Chiang short stories, especially The Story of Your Life and Others, that collection. There's a couple of stories in this book that fall really, really well within that. If you've read The Sparrow, and the author of that, unfortunately, can't recall her name, so I feel a little bit bad about that. But if you read that and enjoyed that book, I think you'll also really enjoy this. I kind of put them in the same vein, but I definitely had mixed feelings about it. But overall, it's some of the best science fiction I've read. Did I feel like there were some times where it was kind of a slog to get through, and do I think that there were some chapters that were better than others? I do, but the strong writing on the chapters that were really good. If you are a science fiction fan, I would definitely recommend checking it out. So that is Hyperion by Dan Simmons. Next time I'm going to be reading, I think it's Barbarians at the Gate, which is the business book about the R.J. Reynolds leverage buyout. So that will be coming up soon. Until next time, please feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and until next time, bye.